recording this webinar, which means that it will be available and uploaded on childhub.org, maybe not today, but starting tomorrow, definitely. So that's it from me right now. One more thing, I will launch this and kindly ask you to respond. So the first question, have you attended Child Hub webinars before? And the second one, how did you learn about the webinar? This is important for us so we can track down how we are promoting and advertising our activities on Child Hub website. Thank you so much. I will wait just a little bit. Okay, great, thank you. So, Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dragana. Thank you for invitation. Thank you all for joining us on this webinar, and thank you for listening and joining about this theme and this thing, which is this topic, which is very important, not just for trans children, trans youth and their parents, but for all of us who are participating in this process. My name is Christian, as Dragana shared with you. I'm psychological counselor working with trans community almost 20 years, with trans children for 3 years now and their parents. I'm executive director of organization XY Spectrum, working in Belgrade, but also working in ex-Yugoslavia region with different communities such as trans and intersex. This is something that is very important, not for my work, but for the children that I'm working with for so many years and their parents, knowing that children in general in Serbia are a specific topic, and the approach to LGBTI children is also specific for a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals working with different communities. I'm going to start with something that is very important to understand. What does it mean to be intersex in general, and what's the idea behind gender identity, and what's the difference, large and important difference between identity and orientation, so we can distinguish those two categories and then try to understand and try to work with specific communities within that aberration. So, Dragana, can I turn off the poll questions, or? Yeah, okay. So this is something that I'm gonna try to share with you from the start. What does it mean to be transgender person in general? It means that the person have the identity or gender expression which is different from the sex that the person is assigned at the birth, which is also very important to distinguish between intersex and trans, which are slightly different. Intersex people are different because they're having different variations, body variations, or hormonal, or even chromosomal variations. So they can be assigned also at birth as male or female, but sometimes it's not possible to decide. As transgender, the term is used for a long time, and the flag is, as you can see, created in 1999. As the term is used broadly and widely, and most of the time, as an activist, I'm using the word with asterisks with it because it's just trans and then the asterisk, so I can, under the X asterisk, I can then explain what does it mean to be trans person with a lot of different trans identities, which can be shared with you, and I don't want to share them now. Most of the known trans person that we know are coming in the media, and we can read about it, and most of the time we can hear about them, are trans sex persons, which have full desire to, or partial desire to have any kind of medical treatment, which goes under the sex reassignment treatment, such as hormone-affirming therapy or sex reassignment surgery, to help them align their body with their identified gender. Most of the people that we know are familiar with coming, as I said, in the media, they're familiar with media, and media are trying to exploit the idea about transsexuals, how they are changing and what that change means to society in general. Transgender person, we are now repeating the term. The terminology is a little bit tricky because it's made by medical professionals back then. So the transgender, we are repeating the term. So transgender person may have partial desire to have any kind of medical assistance, but often as known as short as trans, and it's also umbrella term for a lot of other trans identities. Under those umbrella, there are transvestites or cross-dressers. You're familiar with that, and there's also drag kings and queens, which is very important for trans community. They're much more visible now, and in Belgrade we have club, and there is a scene for drag kings, for drag queens, and that's very important for trans community to have safe and visible space. So the little bit different cross-dressers are a little bit, there's a few differences, because there is just one idea that how transvestite or cross-dressers are known in our society. They're less visible than drag queens and drag kings, which are coming like drag performance, including presentation and behavior, and those clothing and makeup. So they're most of the time they're on the stage and they're performing. So that's one of the differences. And cross-dressers were part of society longer than drag kings, because they've been in the theater, they've been acting in a lot of different parts of the artistic life, and they're also dragging and having their dresses and clothing associated with the other gender. We don't want to say sometimes opposite gender. There's also subcategories which are very important there, and they're not new, but they're now more often in media, and they're more often exploited in academia field. That's non-binary persons and non-conforming person, which is a little bit also different. Between those terms, non-binary person is one who don't fit in divider or binary divider for men and women. They can also be associated and identified as mixed. With non-conforming person, is gender expression is not typically associated with their gender identity. So that's a little bit different. And the gender, it's very important to understand why we are using those terms, and why and how we are explaining what does it mean to be transgender boy or transgender girl, which is very important for children when they want to share their name, pronoun, or how do they express themselves. This is the symbol the trans community is using for, I think, more than 10 years. And it's combined symbol, female and male, and of course, genderqueer symbols, so combined together. To be on the safe side, to understand what does it mean to be transgender boy, that's a child assigned female at birth who identified themselves as a boy, or transgender girl, which is child named assigned male on birth who identified themselves as a girl. Yeah, I mentioned something that on the beginning, which is very important to distinguish what does it mean to have to identify what does it mean to have orientation, identity, or expression of something, which sometimes is very helpful when we try to communicate what does it mean LGBTI. And it's very important to point those things when we are talking with different, of course, people, and to understand what does it mean, what they are presenting, and how they are presenting themselves. So sex refers to complex combinations of psychological characteristics, chromosomes, hormones, and anatomy, which is very, very divided in binary, calling male and female sex. So the sex is mostly assigned at the birth, which is very, most of the time, problematic for intersex people, as I shared, because it's based on appearance of genitalia. On the other side, we have sexual orientation, which is related to individual psychological and emotional attraction on a person of the same sex, and it's very difficult to predict in childhood. Gender identity is eternal and is based on how a person interacts with biological traits, development influences, and environmental conditions, which is self-recognition, as gender identity, which can develop over time. And it's very, very the same way it's happening in childhood. So that's another thing on gender identity, which is gender expression. It's how we can see each other and how we express each other to others, and very sometimes very problematic can be, or can be even mixed, how children express themselves or how they want to express themselves. So we will talk about a little bit later. This is including, of course, behavior and appearance, which can go with makeup or how we're dressing or anything in those two parts of us. So this is something that can be very useful for all of you who are working with the LGBTI community, or you want to learn more with gender-bad person, and it's a good idea how to just to remember how the gender identity, where its position, how biological sex is divided, how orientation and attraction is also can be divided, or doesn't have to be divided. You can just have the flow. What does it mean to have specific gender identity, specific gender expression, or just to learn what's there, how we can have our brain, our emotions, attractions, and of course our sex or our genitals expressed. After this, we're gonna a little bit go through history, because it's very important to understand that trans children are also walking through the gender identity disorder that was we don't use it as activists. We don't use gender identity disorder anymore because it's changed. But that's how it all started in 1980, because in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, in the third version, 1980, this disorder was very, very known, and it was very exploited by medicals, especially psychiatrists, when they wanted to associate something with children which want to express themselves differently, as they have sex assigned on their birth on one side. On the other side, it's very traumatized for trans children to have not just diagnosis, but also to have a lot of other things associated with their transition. But I will share that a little bit later. This is just the information when gender identity disorder was named as disorder and recognized from medical field. And then in some point in 2013, it was renamed, which is very important also for all of us, that there's a change in DSM-5. And after that, in 2019, that was happening in May last year, with this great step and great move, that this diagnosis, it's not there, it's not under the mental diagnosis, which is also very important in the way of definitely working on anti-discrimination laws in some countries. On the other side, working on definitely not putting anything related to trans under the mental diagnosis, which was stigmatizing and very traumatizing, not just for community, but also for medical professionals working with trans community. So now it's under another diagnosis, another segment of the medical of the disease. I'm going to share the video which diagnosis is now, but it's very important to know it's now renamed in gender incongruence of childhood. So this is something that shared, and this is something that is very, very new. So last year, World Health Organization made a change, huge change, and gender incongruence of childhood is now under another diagnosis, which is a diagnosis which is under the sex and body development diagnosis, and it's not anymore stigmatized as mental disease or diagnosis under mental problems. So it's not F anymore, and it's huge leap. And now all countries around the world have to work on the depathologization, not just for trans children, but trans people in general on one side. On the other side, they have to make specific protocols on how to work under this new diagnosis and how they will implement those steps. So yeah, this is something that is, if anybody wants to know more or to go deeper in this problem or process, please let me know. I will share more. This is just the glimpse of what's new and what's there. So the changes that incongruence must and have persist for at least for 2 years, and gender variant behavior and preferences should be there, but not alone, not for the basis for assigning the diagnosis, which is also new in this process. Of course, there are a lot of things that psychiatrists are following in this process, but I will share more how this transition or how this process of transitioning and who are involved in this process. I will share who are the medical specialists which are working in this process of transition. Those are the biggest organizations who are recognized as trans, not just trans children, but trans people in general, and they have their protocols working on. So that's World Health Organization and World Professionals Association for Transgender Health. So they have I can also share the contacts with them if you need, or if you want to learn more about the information they have. So that's possible to share, of course. Something which is very important for trans in general, especially for the kids, is how to come out as trans. For trans adults, it's not a problem, can be a problem to share the idea that something is different. And it's very liberating and exciting when you want to share something which is personally very demanding and very problematic, or very, can be very traumatic also. But if you're a child, it's very specific to find the words how to explain or how to get deeper in the notion that you're not attracted to someone, that you are not involved or in love with someone from your own sex. It's very important to understand and to listen how children are expressing themselves and how they're thinking about their identity. That is very problematic and can be very problematic. So there is few ways how they can, especially when they're a child, how they can express themselves and how they can address this issue. Most of young ones, they don't have not just enough words, but they don't have enough knowledge how to do that. So we are there to help not just the child or children in the process, but the parents to understand, and of course to work on acceptance of those ideas and then that identity. There are some signals and some symptoms that can include gender dysphoria, which is coming and emerging from those symptoms. So most of the time, children are insisting their opposite gender. They don't belong to the gender they're born with or assigned with. Sometimes they want to get off their genitals. It's very important to listen to those words and to follow the process that the child is going through. Feelings of disgust and embarrassment regarding their physical body, so not just on the genitals, but the other parts, especially teenagers when puberty is coming. Rejecting typical gender behavior, which is very also problematic, and most of the time the trauma is coming from there because from the mental health, as in working through mental health program, it's very problematic to not to push child to be there in the role and to play that role if they don't want to, they don't feel that way. And of course, the rejecting expressing the trauma about the bodily change that can occur during the puberty, which is sometimes very slippery slope terrain for trans children. Gender dysphoria most of the time is connected with body anxieties, which is happening even child is very feel unhappy and distressed about living in the body that doesn't reflect their gender identity. It's most of the time essential topic and how to boost their self-esteem and body confidence, because most of children, especially in Serbia, they cannot go through the process of any kind of change before a year of 18. There is some good information and some news that we managed to work on, but I will share that a little bit later. But 18 years is still legally, it's not minor anymore. It's a legal age for consent. So 16 should be, and it is in our law, but still medical professionals working with 18 years, child with 18 years old age, if they can go through any kind of transformation they are willing to work with. Information supported with services, that's another thing which are available to trans children. It's very problematic in Serbia to have that kind of service. We have that kind of service. We are established the service for children and for the parents, but we are now negotiating with some medical professionals and some psychologists and therapists, special therapists, to come to support the work with trans children. There is a lot of gaps. There is not enough knowledge about this topic, and it's, of course, now problematic regarding the pandemic and everything which goes with that, how to exchange the information with others from the world. But we're managing online platforms. So for trans child, it's very important to listen, how they express themselves, and of course there is how to work on their body expressions, especially hairstyle. They want to go to another toilet, they want to move to another changing room when they have any kind of sports activity. So this is very important to follow. Something which is coming from gender dysphoria also, the name and the pronoun. Other trans children, they don't want to be named if they have the name addressed or assigned at birth also, which was chosen by sometimes by parents, but they don't like the name, they don't like the pronoun, and they want to, and they are trying to push it even when they are 3 or 5 years old to change that. So the name and pronoun goes with she, he or she, and of course vice versa, but that doesn't go for non-binary children. They are sometimes changing that from she to he or vice versa, but they are, most of the time they are using they. And that's new thing in our work. So the children recognize they as a good way to address. What does it mean to have gender dysphoria? This is of course the distress which is arising from the conflict between gender identity and the assigned sex. So the person can identify and is identifying with the sex of another, not good word opposite, but another sex. So that's the gender dysphoria, and of course there is a distress which is happening and which is burdening the children. There is a pain or suffering affecting the body or any body parts or mind. Very problematic. So causes of distress can be also associated with social and familiar misunderstanding what children and youth are going through. And there are some of them, I listed at least some of them that they are recognized already in this process. Most of common is common of rejection or fear, shame, or for not conforming the prescribed gender roles. So negative reactions from the parents, harassment from peers, of course, and social environment. Something that is happening if you want to, and if you're forcing the child to adopt the social gender role, it's very risky, can cause risky behavior, and also can end up with self-mutilation and suicidal attempts, which most of the time happening during the puberty. So that's from 12 or 11 or 12 years old teenagers. It's very important to know what does it mean to be in a process of transitioning. Most of the time it's related and it's connected in different articles. You can follow the SRS abbreviation, which goes for sex reassignment surgery, and most of the people are connecting transitioning just to the surgery, which is not good because transitioning goes with everything which is procedure, going with the procedure which is connected to trans people want to go undergo, which goes, which should be more holistic and goes with psychological, of course, physical, social, and emotional change which person, especially trans child, can go through. So there are different common steps in that transition, and definitely three sets of medical professionals working in that medical transition. So there's, of course, social transition, adopting preferred hairstyle, clothing, name, pronoun, and of course the facilities that children are using. They can be used by puberty blockers. They're gonadotropin, which are, and those two are stopping hormone like testosterone and or an estrogen to stop working, not just stop, but to block them, to not help child to develop in the gender they're assigned with, so they can stop. And then gender affirming hormone can be before 18 years old induced, so that's testosterone for those who are assigned female at birth, or estrogen plus an androgen inhibitor for those who are assigned male at birth. And of course, there's a legal transition, which is change the name, gender neutral most of the time, on birth certificates, schools records, and the other documents. There's something that we're working with trans children. We are going through all the processes, not all the steps, but all the processes that your child is going through. So there is also something that we come up from this process, that reparative therapy or delay of transition can be very serious, can have serious and very serious negative consequences for the trans child. Of course, children are not alone in this process. There are parents, of course, working with. When we are working with parents, most of the time they're struggling with the questions. They're struggling with different feelings that can come up. And that's also another very, very big issue for the parents, how to not just address the problem, but how to accept that child is trans and how to work with this. Of course, some feelings, they are emerging and they're repeating from parent to parent. Most of the time, mothers are more active in this process. Sometimes fathers are not present at all. And we have, in our work, in my organization, we have one father who was the leader in the process, which is very, very important for us to see. There is also interest from the father's side, that he wanted to be part of it, and he was the leading role. He had the leading role in the process. But the feelings which can occur in some point, are denial most of the time, embarrassment because of the society, friends and family, anger towards themselves and the child, fear of what are the consequences and what can happen, worry how child will live, or does this have any impact on the future life of the child, feelings of guilt, did something wrong, or did they miss some signs in between, feelings of loss, that there is something that they're gonna lose in the process, not just the child, and sometimes there's huge sense of loss, how they're losing, they have feeling they're losing their son or daughter, or the child is dying and they will have to adopt another person, which gonna be the person after the transition. Of course, there are a lot of practices, so we are trying to affirm, to adopt affirming practices for parents. We don't push anyone to do this, but it's very important to distinguish what does it mean to work affirmingly or not affirmingly. So we are trying to put the agenda in front of them, what's the best part they can, or what's the best way they can work with the child. So there are affirming processes which are, and practices we are most of the time, as I said, they encourage them to work with. So they're supposed to be not, they try to be not judgmental. That's a process to learn how to work with that. and have, or to establish a supportive environment. On the other side, there is a respect they need to organize or establish in the family, at least in their family, maybe in a broader one for the child, of course, to give the support for that expression of the child. Of course, including, and that's another thing, very, very important, is to include the child and to allow the child to have the expression in the clothing or the hairstyle or something which is very important for the child, and to be honest with the child. Sometimes if the parent is angry or in denial, that should be addressed. Of course, there is a special way, or you can work on the way how to do that, but it's very important for child to understand that. Not affirming practices, we're trying to reduce them as possible. Just that's the exclusion from the family activities. Most of the parents do that. They're not locking their children, that's good. That was in the past, but they're just moving child from broader family or from their family, from activities they are working on everyday basis, so they're not giving them any chores or they're not there. Physical or verbal abuse, it's not acceptable at all. Of course, that goes with silence and secrecy about what's happening, placing blame and shame on the child, and if religion is there, so not be shamed by religion, or use any kind of religion or any part of religion to blame the child. Of course, to pressure child to have gender conformity or to play the role, and of course the ridiculing part of you will grow out of it. It's not going to happen, so it's a process, and just don't do it, don't use it, and don't push the child to it. We have, of course, nurturing process which we develop with the parents through time, and I hope from those nurturing process some for sure soon will come up from moms, which are very organized and working between each other and working with each other together in the process, because we have the group for parents to stand up for the child when they're mistreated, or to minimize, if it's possible, for social pressure if the child is facing one. Of course, to make it clear, the insults, any kind of jokes on sex and gender identity are not tolerated. Of course, to express disapproval of that, to be on the lookout the danger of signs that indicate the mental health problem can occur, of course, such as anxiety, which is the most common one, insecurity, depression, low self-esteem, and some emotional problems. So those things we have to follow, and we have to follow the process so we can map those signs. Of course, it's possible to kind of connect not just the child, but family and the child, especially with LGBTQI organizations, with the resources and some events. And if it's very important for children, it's really important for them to know they're not alone. That's huge problem for, especially for teenagers. Of course, to provide access to a variety of the books, news materials, including positive presenting gender diverse individuals. And another thing is very important, education, resources, and support, so they can deepen their understanding of their experience. This is part of also our process and our work. So we are working with the children on this together. Support from parents. Parents can support child in any way, so many ways, and very early help makes really different. So the early start, early recognition, not just of trans identity, but all the processes which is coming with those ideas or those identities in the meantime. Parents should understand and respect their child gender identity. On the other side, failing to do that can lead to safeguarding, which is also another part of the problem, but that can be different later and can cause the child emotional distress. So if there are disagreements, they will need support and validation from parents, definitely when they're a teenager, of course, even they're adult later. And parents should be the trans child's strongest and biggest support in this process. We have practitioners, which are also part of the process. If they increase the knowledge but they can increase the knowledge by listening, which is also very important. Most of the time, we don't have any experience, so we can exchange with somebody who have experience, or we can learn more with different resources. But the main thing, if we don't have any experiences, we can talk with someone who, as I said, someone who have that kind of experience, or we can learn more, because there are a lot of ways to learn now about not just the trans children, but about the science, about the way they express, about the problem they are crossing to. So there are a lot of ways to learn about this. Of course, there are fields that practitioners should also be alert. Of course, that's the name and pronoun to follow, sports uniform, or the way the child want to address, toilets and changing rooms, sports activities, and residential trips. Those places, or those fields, or those places could be followed by someone who understands the problem and could be addressed to another part of group that the child is in. Of course, that could be also the exchange with teachers, or someone who's guarding the group of the children. So this is very important to identify the fields and to follow the child through the process. Practitioners also can be supportive and should be supportive. And there's also something not just to learn about, but there is why they should make a positive, or at least supportive environment for the child, so that so the differences can be respected, of course, and celebrated. It doesn't go just for trans children, it goes for all different children here. Support of all, we want to emphasize the idea that the parents, of course, need to talk to someone. There's a child's pediatrician most of the time, and pediatrician can be, if the person is open for this thing, can be helpful in the process, and understand and appreciation of difficult feelings and concerns can be also shared with a pediatrician. But we are supporting parents to work and to find some counselor or some therapist. We have also the therapist they can talk to, so they can share the information, or not just information, they can share the feelings, not only about the child, but how those feelings are reflecting their everyday life, or their partnership, or how they reflect on the other kids in the family. So that's also important. For practitioners, need to help the parents, of course, to understand and to respect, and the consent they together can work too closely with school that kid is going, and to reduce any negative experiences if possible, of course. And of course, general support, schools, medical care facilities, mental health providers, social and legal support must work collaboratively to ensure that trans children, of course, trans young people or persons are supported and protected. So that is all from my side, and I'm going to introduce the organization just in one sentence. We are an organization working, as I mentioned at the beginning, with trans and intersex predominantly. We are a service-based organization, and we're in direct contact with medical teams working with trans community and trans people in Serbia, which exists over 30 years, and that goes also with medical team working with intersex children and their parents in Serbia too. Both of them are located in Belgrade, and there are two main hospitals working with trans and intersex children, and we're in contact with both medical teams, and we have legal practitioners helping us in those processes. So that's all.
Thank you, Chris, so much. So thank you for all clarifications and definitions. I believe that it can be very, very confusing for people to understand the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity, and gender and sex, and what is going on with sexual orientation after the gender reassignment and stuff like that. Yeah. So I'm inviting all participants to write in the chat box if they have any comments or questions for Chris. or just maybe some ideas. And meanwhile, I have two questions for you.
Please.
Yeah, actually, I think that. So no, let me define my question. So it is like, what is the most common prejudice or stereotype that trans children and trans people are facing with? And I'm thinking about, you know, that context of medicalization and talking about this issue only from this point of view, you know, like this hospital point of view. And I believe that maybe we can, you know, we can all, I mean, all of us together overcome this problem by using, you know, maybe more human rights based approach, and trying to explain that when we are talking about trans children and trans people as well, so children and adults, we are talking about basic human rights. Is it, I mean, that's your experience? Or
Yeah, definitely, because it's most of the time, if you're talking about trans, there is also very stigmatized approach that trans people are sick or ill, and that was going all together with the diagnosis that trans people and trans children have, and that was in the past. That was, of course, that still is present very much. But on the other side, as I shared last year, we managed to move diagnosis from the mental health diagnosis to another diagnosis, which is related to body and sex, which is very important because it's not health diagnosis anymore. And the pathologization of the trans identities in general is very present now, and we are working on that. So that's human right approach to the variety or the difference that trans people are living. Trans people, LGBTI people, people in general, different. So we are now just positioning ourselves to judge or to look through a lens of medical care and to have people medicalized. So they're going to do this or they're going to change that, and they're mentally ill. So that was idea behind trans person till last year. Of course, they didn't change in society. They changed in medical field, which can and have influence to the general public on one side. So I hope from that point, we're going to work together to change the narrative, to change the idea that trans people are definitely not sick. That goes beyond any other comprehension. There's nothing related to that on one side, and on the other side, there are a lot of varieties that we are living through the centuries, and that's very huge and very important for us to move the body as we have. I'm talking, of course, in general, to move the body from the state, because state have the knowledge, I'm quoting this, the knowledge and the experience to work with our bodies whatever they want and whatever they like to, which is not realistic. And that's why we need human right approach, because we're owning not just our bodies, but our lives. So that goes for a lot of other things, not just for trans community. But trans community and intersex community are really, really now fighting for this human right approach. And I hope depathologization will help, definitely.
And when you put it in that way, it looks like that this battle of trans people goes beyond only human rights of transgender people and children, because we are fighting for our lives, yeah. And to have control, to control.
Basically, yes, we are doing that, and this is and thank you for that. We have now as we organize the group for parents and for the children. We now are moving towards, because this is a new step in Serbia, definitely, and I'm talking about definitely ex-Yugoslavia, because we have the first group of that kind in this region, maybe even in Balkans, but I will not confirm that now. But we are now working more openly with medical professionals which are thinking about children. That's another thing. They're open not just to process the transition, but they're also open to understand. That's another approach. That's another thing. And I'm in one group which consists of surgeon, endocrinologists, different medical specialists, and they invite me from time to time to open this from human right approach. And this is very new. because those lectures are happening in medical university. And this was not history. We are making history of this now. And on one side, we have process, as I mentioned, 18 years of consent. So the young person can consent and have any kind of medical procedure done to the child, because the child is still an 18. But now we are moving that boundary, and now we have the first, we already managed to have the first child. He is 16 and a half, 16 years, 16 and a half, and he managed to get the hormone treatment. And that's very important. So we move the boundary. And
yeah, definitely. It's a great victory, I think. And maybe for the end of our story today, if you are asked to give one crucial key advice to all professionals who are working with trans children, hopefully this webinar will be downloaded by many of them. What would that be?
Listen, please listen. We're starting or moving from not listening and not participating to please listen. Because all the information child will provide, of course, we can follow what the child wants or need, but listen to the problem, listen to the issue that the child is facing. Because everything which goes is from communication, that's definitely on that level for now. Maybe some signs will be there in a year or two, but listen what child wants to share with you. Of course, we can all not just judge that, but we can all be reassuring to the child. But it's not the idea to reassure the child that the child is wrong. Listen to the child, how they are feeling, what they want, and is that not real to them? That's definitely real to them, because we have the child which are explaining to us how they are feeling, and those feelings are deep, very deep inside. They're not just feelings on the surface, I like this, or I don't want this, or I don't agree with this. There's a much more deep down there that's distress. That those feelings are happening, and distress is occurring, and it's very problematic if you don't listen. Of course, all practitioners, I'm one of them. Most of the time, I don't understand, because the child doesn't have the meaning to share with me what does it mean and how they feel. But they can come up with some words, because they are doing that. They have their own words, how they are explaining themselves, but they are consistent in that. And it's very, very important to listen, and of course to work step by step, not just with the parent, but specifically with the child, to understand how big is the distress. Does dysphoria come in, or dysphoria is part of something else? Of course, to listen and to look for the signs if there is something beyond the trans identity problems, or trans identity as the problem. So on the other side, there is also exchange. It's very important to exchange with another professional or practitioner, or somebody who's involved in the process, or even with someone who's not involved in the process, so they can come up with some maybe not new ideas, but some new approach maybe. But the first things and the most important thing is
to listen. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris, really so much for today's webinar, and thank you all participants. Hopefully this is just the beginning of introducing this topic in our Child Hub framework. And meanwhile, I'm inviting you all to visit childhub.org and to learn and to read our content and materials and publications and news related to child protection and social welfare system. And that's it for today. So thank you very much. Stay safe and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all, guys.
Thank you all.